that can get a ham sandwich indicted by a grand jury.
This is FairPlay on justicenews.net.
Welcome to FairPlay. I'm your host, Imran speaking. VAMJ, Virginia Marijuana Justice, is a community group that is dedicated to fighting for cannabis consumers, cultivators, workers, patients, and their families. VAMJ began lobbying in Virginia in 2019 to support passage of adult-use cannabis laws in the Commonwealth. Since then, VAMJ, Virginia Marijuana Justice, has been active in Richmond and across the state, educating the public and advocating for systemic changes in the criminal justice system. Michael Krawitz is also a member of VAMJ and is also part of Veterans Action Council. It's an activist group of veterans dedicated to working on issues to help the veterans and their community and to benefit the mankind. And at the same time, VAMJ is striving to make a place for small cannabis businesses to grow in Virginia. They see a world where there's room for women, veterans, and minorities to have a chance in the cannabis industry, which is really interesting. VAMJ believes that cannabis is often an alternative to harmful drugs that have targeted our communities. They also believe that our veterans and the elderly should have considerations and no barriers to obtaining cannabis, when we know it often relieves them of symptoms of PTSD and other stresses or disorders that affect their health. VAMJ is reforming marijuana laws in Virginia to reflect those issues, and they're also fighting to free those who are wrongfully incarcerated for merely having this God-given plan. And joining me today is one of their co-founders of VAMJ, Michael Krawitz. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me, and welcome to FairPlay.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about VAMJ, Michael. How did it come about? What was the purpose and need to start Virginia Marijuana Justice?
Yeah, so VAMJ is very much a subsidiary of, a sister organization of DCMJ. And DCMJ has been a leader nationally on cannabis activism, with the organization behind the Initiative 71, which was the only marijuana initiative, the only legalization initiative that would create adult legal cannabis that was done on a civil rights platform. And because it's the District of Columbia, of course, there's other special little factors about it that work in Washington, D.C. But we have MJ, Maryland Marijuana Justice, and VAMJ are like subsidiaries of DCMJ.
How did you guys start this?
Yeah, so I actually, as an activist working on cannabis policy while I was still in college, we wound up working up in D.C. on Initiative 59, I think it was, which was the medical marijuana initiative with DCMJ. And that was when I first met the leaders of DCMJ, Adam Eidinger and Nicholas and others. And really just a fantastic group of people to work with, and that's been just a relationship that we've kept on ever since. And working in Virginia, working on legalization here, and having DC having already legalized cannabis, it's just a natural to have a mentor like that that's so close at hand. And VAMJ, I think, really played a critical role. I mean, there's a lot of hands in this process, and a lot of work that went into the legalization here in Virginia, and it's not over yet. The actual legislation needs to be run through this legislature before it's done here in Virginia, and we've legalized it, so to speak, completely. But yet we did play quite a critical role, especially in sort of the 11th hour, where the legislature had actually sent the bill to the governor, which would have legalized marijuana a few years from now actually, and you wouldn't actually even be able to possess marijuana legally until that first store opened. And we said to the governor, no, that's just not going to work. We want legalization now. We want to start setting people out of prison and setting them free now. We want people to be able to grow cannabis in their backyard now. And this is civil rights and justice. If it really is to you like it is to us, then you'd want to do it now. And he agreed with us and did it, and actually took the power of the governor to oppose the legislature and send the bill back with those provisions. And it was a very close vote, but we actually won, and that's how we actually legalized cannabis on July 1st for real. You can grow cannabis in your backyard in Virginia, and you can possess it and have a joint instead of a glass of wine or whatever while you're watching TV in the evening, and it's absolutely legal, and it's a beautiful thing.
That's fantastic. That's actually how I got to know about you guys. You and your other co-founders, like Rachel Donnellan. And I was just stunned that I heard that this group is fighting because I knew what was going on. The governor, probably one of the only good things that he's done is this, and the outgoing governor, that is. But I found out about this, that you guys are pushing it, and you want it now. Of course, now. But how did you guys pull this off in a southern state where tobacco rules? How was it possible?
Well, I've been doing this stuff for a long time in Virginia, and I'm probably one of the few people that can really give you an insight to this. I'm not sure how well I can describe it, but I have it anyway. and what it is it's not like it would appear, for one thing. It would appear that the Republican Party was just stopping marijuana reform for the last 25 years. And the Democratic Party coming into power in both the House and Senate, or the House of Delegates and the Senate in Virginia, and the governor's office prevailed. That's only part of the story. Because really, years ago, we put in a bill with a Republican legislator. In other words, I had a Republican legislator. His name was Delegate Griffith. He's now Congressman Griffith. Mm-hmm. And we convinced him, we actually helped him change his position, really, and he put in a bill, pro-cannabis marijuana access, medical access bill. And he was the chair of the subcommittee that we were, initially hearing this bill in front of. And the rest of the committee was very strongly Republican controlled. And it wasn't the Republican control per se, it was the fact that most of those Republicans were actually former prosecutors and former judges and stuff like that, and it was just a brick wall. I up to that point, I had thought it was like a Republican thing. Mm-hmm. So if I had a Republican put it forward, that would be the end of that. But it wasn't a Republican thing. It was never a Republican thing. It was just these guys and a few gals, mostly guys, that are former judges and former prosecutors that literally have been a brick wall to any reform, any positive movement for at least the last 25 years. And when we got a Democratic control through the full House, that opened the door to reform. That reform first took the place of decriminalization, because we actually had a bill in the legislature for 6 years to decriminalize cannabis. Mm-hmm. So we actually were getting committee hearings and stuff and working on that and working it through and just not getting anywhere because we were hitting that brick wall. But nonetheless, we had that bill for all that time. And on that 7th year was this year where the legislative control changed, and within that first year, we were able to decriminalize cannabis. That summer following, we had 2 rolling commissions that studied legalization, one internal and one a legislative panel, and they both looked at other states, and they both took in a lot of evidence and then made a presentation to the legislature on options and what they learned from looking around the country and looking at the issues of how you could legalize cannabis. And true to their word, the leadership in the Democratic Party in Virginia, in the Senate and the House, were able to come up with a bill and send it to the governor's desk. There's a side story to all this, which is that the governor was caught in a very embarrassing situation where he had rather disgracefully gone out in public in a blackface outfit that is just not acceptable anymore. It wasn't ever acceptable, but it certainly isn't acceptable now. And that, I think, was the critical thing in everything, because there was a couple of legislators that I think really had already a lot of ideas about what they could do, but would be held back by the governor. And I think the governor on the the racial equity issue was put in a position where he couldn't say no.
Mm-hmm. So it was also an act of God that occurred for this thing to happen.
It feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, because for all those listeners who have no idea what occurred, if you don't mind, before we get into the hard stuff, I just wanted you to, because you're from the 70s, so that there was a time when this country's one of the biggest crops were hemp, and cannabis was treasured, and it was used across the board in so many things until obviously the the PVC technology, the pipes and the plastics came in and screwed up everything. But tell us, why was this plant created by God banned in the United States of America and not those things that kill people, literally, like meth, like cocaine, like LSD, and like guns and alcohol, which are just, all around the country?
Yeah, it's actually, in my mind, I mean, there's a lot of different answers, and you can make it as complicated as you want, really. But there's actually a fairly simple answer, and that is that there was an opportunity, and people went for it to use people's behaviors, people's attitudes, people's even cultural identity and rituals and practices of that culture against them. And this has been something that's been weaponized for a while, at least a couple hundred years that I know of, in active terms. And it's not just marijuana, and that's the thing. Like, back in the days that you're talking about, which was around 1900, 1920, 1930, there were wars, right? And one of the things that we took back as a spoil from World War I was some patents on synthetics and nylons and things that we took back from Germany as spoils of war. And we liked having these things as a society. The society itself, at that time, was in favor of chemicals, and chemicals made your life better, and chemicals made your world cleaner, and chemicals were safer, and chemicals were edible, and chemicals would make food better, and chemicals, you get my drift. And that was not the companies telling people that they wanted to do that. It was the people telling the companies they wanted to do that. And spoils of war made that even more easily accomplished, but it was something that was probably going to happen anyway. And here comes, the prohibitionists, if you want. But they weren't just saying, marijuana's bad. They were saying everything's bad. Marijuana's bad. Tobacco's bad. Nicotine's bad. Alcohol's bad. Sex is bad. This is bad. That's bad. But they were just throwing everything at the wall, and what stuck is what they ran with. And it never really stuck. Alcohol stuck for a while, right? We had alcohol prohibition for a while until it just created chaos. And the people that started alcohol prohibition realized that it was doing more damage than good. And it was certainly not achieving the ends that they had intended, so they ended it. But marijuana prohibition is a weird one because it started 100 years ago, and it really only kicked in, about 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. The war on drugs, right? President Nixon's war on drugs. So the people that were alive when this prohibition started, they're not even alive anymore. I mean, nobody that was around in 1900, 1910 as an adult is around anymore. So there's nobody that remembers what it was like before cannabis prohibition. But before cannabis prohibition, cannabis was on the shelf in the pharmacy. And I don't mean like just a cannabis product. I mean like a lot of cannabis products. And that was all wiped out off the shelves. But again, it wasn't just the government coming in and taking these products away. It was also a lot of consumer sentiment that went into this process as well, because at that time, you went in the doctor's office and you got a shot. And if you didn't think you got a good service, if you didn't get a shot, and as you know, cannabis doesn't work that way. It's not an injection. It's a plant material, and that was a big problem for cannabis. Also, the fact that in the early 1900s, they were just starting to really perfect the ability to produce a reliable cannabis product. You have to understand they didn't discover the active ingredient in cannabis, THC, until the 1960s. So they were doing a lot of guesswork back then as to whether it even had active ingredient in it. They actually tested it on dogs, interestingly, back in the 1930s. But that's the thing, cannabis prohibition is just, I would call it almost an accident of history. But it's based on the will of the people, the intent, ill intent, racism, some of our more baser, nasty inclinations. But this is one of, I would call, a trio where we went after black people, African Americans, for cocaine. We went after the Asian Americans and the people that were coming and working on our trains and railways, China and elsewhere, with their opium, and we went after them for that. And cannabis was the bag of plant material that was being dragged across the southern border by our Mexican friends, and that was it. They were Mexican. They were coming across the border. What can you go after them for? nothing else, well, how about that marijuana? It's a convenient tool.
So how has been the state and the federal government's response to what you guys are doing? I mean, a lot of people must be pissed off.
Not at all. No. Well, the thing is that what we've been doing as a movement has been at the national and even international level. You have to look at it all in one big picture, even though it's kind of difficult to do. But we started with the first marijuana initiative back in 1971 in California, Prop 19 number 1. There was a Prop 19 number 2 in the 90s. But
you were involved in that too?
I've got people that I work with on a regular basis that were involved in 1971. Yeah.
All right. That's cool.
But I wasn't there. I was not even on that side of the country. It was a California initiative back in 1971. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, the Proposition 215, which was 1996, that kicked off this modern medical marijuana movement. That was the 13th initiative, as I understand it, in California. And all the other 12 had failed.
Wow.
That's a lot of effort and a lot of years to move the ball forward before we finally got any traction. But my point is that since Proposition 215, we've had over 30 states that have modern medical cannabis laws. And what is it, 17 or 18 states now already that have adult-regulated access for non-medical or not necessarily medical access of cannabis. So that's we're not fighting with the government. We are the government. I mean, we're how many states are there in this country? There's only a few states left that don't have any kind of cannabis policy. If it's not a CBD policy or a cannabis policy, it's a hemp policy. Hemp policy crosses every border because it's federally legal. Got that just a few years ago, 2018, I guess it was, Farm Bill. Mm-hmm. So at this point, we've legalized cannabis, at least the low THC hemp variety, nationwide, and we've already set so much movement forward on reform that there's not much of the federal government left that isn't working for us, representing us, coming from states with very active and proactive programs. Yeah. It's hard to be against something that your state is in favor of when you're an elected representative of those people.
So what you're saying is that when the people sentiment becomes strong, then the lobbies, no matter what kind of lobby we're talking about, alcohol or tobacco or the pharmaceutical lobby, and those in the government who've been supporting those lobbies, they don't stand a chance when the people's sentiment changes.
Well, I don't know about that, but there's an old saying, the people lead and the government follows, and there's also something that my colleague here in Virginia, Lennis Worth, the great, also founding member of VAMJ, really great lady, historian, activist going back all the way to the 1980s, way before I got started. And she taught me about a concept called cultural lag. And I thought it was a really great thing to learn about because in activism, it's hard to have a goal that's meaningful. It's hard to, what are we going to do? Legalize in 5 years, and then you don't legalize in 5 years, then what? You're totally depressed because you didn't succeed, right? So a goal that you can actually succeed at is kind of hard to come by. And what she taught me was that there's a certain lag, a cultural lag, where the public, the people, have already discovered this. They've already started towards this change. But the politics just haven't caught up yet. The government just hasn't, the policy, hasn't quite caught up yet. And that time in between those 2 points is a cultural lag. And we as activists, if we can shorten that cultural lag, then that's something that we can achieve, and that's something that's worth doing. Mm-hmm. But that's the way it always works. I mean, it's not the idea that the government is some different entity and that we're going to oppose it or support it is already itself a defunct concept. We are we are the government. We the people thing is real, and it's been thrown around in a lot of very, I'd say, abusive ways lately. But it's very true that we are the government, and the states send representatives to the Congress, and they represent our states. And up until rather recently, this was a very polite and mutually beneficial relationship that we had between our states and between our officials and between ourselves, where we were all working for the common good. And I don't know when we got off the rails exactly, but it was fairly recently that happened.
Yeah, I mean, this happens when the government does not do what you're saying.
No, I strongly disagree with that. the thing is that there is no government to not do what you're saying. To have that saying would be to have a separation between the government and the people. There is no separation between the government and the people. There's no separation between me and you. There's no separation between any living things. Those separations are I think, an illusion in the end. We are all living things in a living environment, in fact, a closed environment. From the outside perspective, we're all one organism, including the earth itself. So anyway, the government is the people. Mm-hmm. The government does what the people want it to do. Believe me, the people want what's happening in the government. And there are differences of opinion about what policies we should take and stuff like that. But this concept that there is this entity or driving force behind the scenes or cabal or coalition or conspiracy that spans centuries and spans continents, and somehow this is a cabal that does things that the people then have to oppose, is the food of some really terrible regimes of our world.
I actually absolutely disagree with you.
Okay.
But both of us can agree to disagree, but one of us has to be true. Not both of us can be right.
Well, you know what Dire Straits said? Two men say they're Jesus, one of them must be wrong.
Two men say they're Jesus?
That's a Dire Straits lyric. The lyric goes, two men say they're Jesus, one of them must be wrong, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, both of them can be right, of course,
No, they can't, of course not.
So, I mean,
unless they're looking at a mirror.
Yeah, I don't know how much do you really go out and interact with those at least millions of them who are wrongfully incarcerated. Out of the 2.2 million people who are wrongfully incarcerated by the U.S. government, there is no data out there. The closest report that we have is close to 500,000 people. So I understand what you're saying, but your government is not always doing what you want them to do.
Well, I mean, you're talking about a population that's been disenfranchised. Those are not participants in our.
Talk to their family members and meet them one-on-one. Then you'll know, what's going on.
No. I'm talking about the fact that they're not able to vote in many cases. In all cases, in prison. In many cases, after prison, you still have to. Depends on locality as to how your voting rights work, but nonetheless, I was very carelessly and maybe callously not thinking about the people that were disenfranchised and the fact that they have no say in government and the government isn't representing them. There's not even a representative democracy for people that are in prison. And if you imprison people based on their race or based on their income status or based on their behavior, their rituals, culture, and practice, then in fact you are disenfranchising people as an act of genocide. So, I think there might be a lot more room to agree between the two of us than you think.
First of all, when you guys were trying to legalize it, why did they push it to 3 years? I mean, what were they waiting for?
This is all about setting up the regulated program and thinking it through and doing it right, recognizing the fact that they were going to take a whole year just to pass the bill. I said that really quickly before, but let me kind of make that clear. What became legal on July 1st became legal on July 1st. You can grow plants in your yard, you can possess it, you can even share it with friends, but you can't sell it. There's no sales of any kind. The sales and all the regulated stuff has to be voted on again and then has to be set up and been implemented. And this is actually a fair amount of time to do that and to do it right and to do it carefully. They gave themselves a little bit extra time. So it's not really that crazy to put it out a couple of years, especially, given the special iterative process of having a whole another year just to pass the thing, which is this year, and that's going to be interesting. We're going to be right there doing this again, basically this year, the whole process from last year. But that's where we're at, and many states have done that. Other states have actually made it where you weren't able to possess legally until that first sale, and that was one of the things that we were very much, sort of on guard against, and that was why we worked so proactively to see that, if you're going to legalize it, then start the criminal justice reform now. don't wait a few years.
But when they have record of 18 or more states already doing it, I mean, they don't have to wait 3 years to catch up. They could have just done it in a couple of months, at least the basics of what other states are doing. Don't you think that would have made more sense?
I agree with you. I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me on a lot of levels, but I'm actually in this process. I've got a seat on the council it's called the Virginia Public Health Advisory Council. So I'm actually a member of the Cannabis Control Authority's sort of board of advisors.
Ooh.
I'm on the inside looking at how this is unfolding, and
no wonder we disagree on so many things.
Well, I don't know. I'm appointed there I'm appointed to that position as a veterans advocate, specifically for my veterans advocacy experience. So we might not be so different. But anyway, the thing is that this council gives me an inside view. It puts me right in the middle of this process, and I can tell you that there's a lot of very important things that we're going to have to resolve. And Virginia, it's the first state in the South to legalize, but it's also the home of the DEA. It's very significant military presence. So us legalizing is a big deal. And I don't have any trouble with people that want to do this carefully. I have trouble with people who want to drag their feet, slow us down, keep us from doing what we need to do. Yeah, sure, but I'm not going to be, the one that's going to really throw up a huge fight just because you really want to do this carefully. In a state that has been so obstinately against reform for 40 or 50 years, we're going to work steadily towards reform now, unless the process gets derailed this year. And back to the Republican Democratic Party thing, I don't think that's going to be an issue. You can come back and haunt me on this prediction later if I'm wrong, but I don't feel that the Republican Party are going to be in the position that they used to be in, where these, like I said, handful of former judges and former prosecutors can sort of run roughshod over the process. Back then, they could always say, well, they're being tough on crime, or they're trying to stop drugs. But now, they'd be seen as slowing down progress, preventing us from creating jobs. So I think that it might be a little different dynamic for them now.
So what about those people who are in jail right now? Their state has this...
They should be set free immediately. And this is a place where I find we would probably have strong agreement.
Yeah, I mean, because, a lot of their families talk to me. And I get, I'm an active person on JPay, where, you'd have to spend your own money to be able to connect with these gentlemen. Some of them can't read or write. Some of them don't have even the money to put on the books so they can call me. So, what's going on in that regard? I mean, it kind of, doesn't it feel weird that a state where they've incarcerated these people, probably a couple of thousand of them for less than an ounce, and these guys are in prison and they don't know when they're going to get out?
Yeah, the marijuana policy in Virginia has steadily arrested and prosecuted. I think it was 20 or 30,000 per year, I think was the number, if I remember correctly. And that, think about that, for not 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years, but for the last 50 years, those kind of numbers. The damage done by the arrests and the disruption of people's lives and their families' lives by the arrest is so bad all by itself, without the specter of even being in prison. Those who are in prison should be immediately set free. The process that they're doing right now is they immediately the charges that were in their system that were very, very simple possession charges that were on people's records were immediately just erased from the system, as I understand it. And then they're working on the lower level offenses, and then from there the more higher level offenses, I guess, in that way. But the way that they've laid this out, and the way that I've seen and it's been presented to me, the way that they're doing this at the state level internally within the governor's office and within the administration is just too slow. It's too slow for us, and that's why we're protesting. That's why we want to go, and we will go to the governor's office and mansion next month and protest to speed this process along and free people who are incarcerated for marijuana offenses. There should never be a circumstance where people are in prison for marijuana charges and looking out the prison window at people who are doing the exact thing that they were doing and are being hailed as entrepreneurs and making lots of money legally and with the full support of the state, doing the exact same thing that they were incarcerated for. That's completely and totally unacceptable, and it just shouldn't happen. That we actually get to that point where we have the stores open, but that's a long time from now, and even that as a deadline, the ultimate deadline, I hope we don't reach it. I really hope that we can instigate them to move this process along and make sure that we've done the best that we can. And there's even beyond the actual people that are in prison for marijuana, you got to also think about the people that are back in prison because of marijuana. And that's a whole other category where you have your full sentence for some other crime that was thrown back in your face because they drug tested you for marijuana while you're on probation or parole. So these things are a little harder to get into the system and unravel, but believe me, this is something that we consider incredibly important and we're focusing on as a movement as well as our organization.
That's fantastic. Because a couple of months ago when I got some messages from VAMJ about a phone call-a-thon, I replied to them. I said, we need a street voice-a-thon. You guys need to be out there. All of us should be out there, the people and the organizations, and raising our voices because that's how they listen.
Well, there's also a thing about that. We found that at some point during that day, we filled up their voicemail, and they weren't answering the phone. So we're not even sure they know how many people actually called in, and we're not sure that they actually felt the full effect of the voice there from the citizens of Virginia. So that's a big part of why we're going to be going to the Capitol, is to make sure that they actually do hear from us, and that we make ourselves available to the media, etc.
I worked for the government for over a decade, and this is a tactic because a sensible person listens to the voicemail and then takes notes and deletes them so that there's room for more. But they don't do this. They leave they leave it like that to slap you on the face.
It works. It works quite well because I felt very slapped.
Yeah. Does VAMJ or any other organization actually have a number on the how many people are in prison for marijuana possession in Virginia?
No, we don't have the good data on that yet. That's part of the problem that we're working on with the Bureau of Prisons and everybody. The last prisoner project came in and working with another organization by a similar name, Marijuana Justice in Virginia, did a really great presentation before the legislature and really dug into the numbers and looked at everything as well. So we've got some pretty good eyes on this, and there's some real issues with the ability to just do this. It would be nice if we could just do this, just hit your button and make it happen. But it sounds like it's actually going to be a bit of work. But they need to make it happen. It's work. Do it, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're wealthy and you know people, then you can get off the hook just like that. But if you're a poor black or brown guy, then you're kind of screwed. And I know you did mention about the marijuana justice from Chelsea Higgs, right? I mean, she did talk about the failure to address resentencing, which is like, what? Where does this state government live on another location besides the earth? That they completely forgot about the resentencing part, because what you just said earlier is exactly what I had heard, that hey, I'm in prison and this guy that I know called me up that he's gonna make a lot of money selling legal marijuana. So it is kind of sad.
Talk about a slap in the face, right?
Yeah, I mean it's more than that. It's gut wrenching too. But I mean, you are in there, you know what's going on. So how is the policy being enacted, or is it really being enacted? Something really happening?
We're making stuff happen. VAMJ handed out about 25,000 cannabis seeds that we brought down from our activists in DC that grew them legally and were able to share them legally, and then our activists carefully walked them across the bridge there, breaking federal law in open plain sight, and with press releases advanced to the to the police and to the authorities that we were going to do it. And the DEA, nobody really took us up on trying to harass us for going across the bridge with marijuana. But nonetheless, we brought the seeds down in Virginia and handed them out, and handed them out to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Virginians.
Yeah.
And it seems like we started something because at this point, there are now at least 4 different sort of structural seed giveaway things that are happening in Virginia, and hundreds of thousands of cannabis seeds are being given out. The seeds that will grow hemp plants that are high in CBG or CBN or CBD, cannabis plants that are high in THC or have beautiful varieties of different terpenes and mixes that produce different effects for high or for medicine, and those are being cultivated right now across the state. Well, not right now, so much as in the spring. And this is something where this is going to continue to grow very organically, very quickly. The government can either do what they said and get this market up and running, or we will wind up with a very interesting sort of home grow state. But either way, we're going to be seriously growing a lot of weed next year.
So, I have a question for you from one of our listeners, and this guy, he goes out to DC to get his cannabis. He can't get it in Virginia, and then he takes an Uber because he doesn't have a car, so he spends $50 going there and then $50 coming back, and then obviously the cost of good cannabis in DC varies. So we're talking about a couple of $100 here. So when do you think that day would come that people in Virginia wouldn't have to go cross borders, which is also, I heard, illegal? You can't cross border. You can't take cannabis across the border.
Well, that's the federal, that's the federal authority, is when you cross a border. The interesting thing is that if you go into Virginia and get a medical cannabis certificate and make yourself eligible through the cannabis program here in Virginia, get the card for Virginia to get medical cannabis right now, which is legal right now, you can then not only purchase cannabis in Virginia, which probably isn't going to help the person that you're talking to, because there's not that many of these dispensaries on the state. It would be purely by luck or by chance that there was one rather close. But nonetheless, you get this license, this card in Virginia, and they actually recognize it up in D.C. So you can go, and they reciprocate. You can go to D.C. to the medical cannabis dispensaries up there and purchase cannabis there. Nonetheless, it is crossing a border where technically, I guess you'd have to say technically, you're violating federal law. We haven't seen the federal government take us up on that, and I don't really see the federal government arresting any individuals. I don't know how that would even happen. You maybe get pulled over on a speeding ticket in the middle of the bridge or something like that, right at the very center of the bridge with your I don't know, because on either side of the very center of the bridge in D.C. you're legal as long as you're carrying it the way you're supposed to be carrying it, and same in Virginia. So you're legal on both sides. You're only illegal for that fraction of a second as you cross from one to the other.
That's true. But don't you think, because critics have been saying that, these medical marijuana programs are just sideshows. I mean, why not just be as smart as Canadians and legalize this whole thing, just like what they've done with alcohol, tobacco, vaccines, and other pharmaceuticals that kill people? Yeah, I get you on the kill people stuff. I mean, the government seemed to be a lot more at ease giving us oxycodone, right, or whatever. Fentanyl, whatever, but yeah, that's the way it is. But we're changing it. Hopefully, we're changing that. But Canada, you'll find it very interesting that they still have a very strong medical cannabis program. And the thing that you'll find interesting is that veterans up there can actually get their cannabis through that program paid for through their veterans benefits. That's cool. So that's one of the big problems in the USA is, veterans have their health care at the VA. That's sort of
dialed into their finances, that they have the health care taken care of at the VA. So for them having to leave the VA and go get a doctor outside the VA and then pay for all the medicine outside the VA, that usually creates a financial hardship for the vet. Or I'd say usually, what the heck, usually, I'll go for usually. But so up in Canada, you can actually order your cannabis by phone, with your certification from your doctor and everything, and have it delivered to your house under the Veterans Program. And it's also legal, for adult regulated access. People can show their ID and buy cannabis.
Yeah, like this guy texted me when it became legal. I said, "Hey man, congratulations!" And he said, "Yeah, now I go buy it and I get a receipt."
Yeah.
So it is fascinating. I'm going to come to the veterans. I just had one more question in regards to incarceration. What do you think is the process of clemency for those who are incarcerated for marijuana possession?
Well, that's another thing that we're working on, because we don't think it's appropriate for somebody to have to, go and pay for expensive legal fees, or for that process to be onerous even, that requires such, attorney support to be able to handle it. That's something that we're very strongly encouraging the governor as well to do, is to provide legal services and make it so that these processes aren't onerous for the people that are trying to clear their name.
Yeah, because for some stupid thing, I ended up in a court some time back. It was bad driving habit, but I'm learning. I'm not doing that anymore. But the surprising thing, what I saw in the court, was that as I was waiting for my turn with my attorney, there was a line of people coming, all of them obviously black people, and everyone was just being hauled in for marijuana possession. And some of them were out of state and they had to quit their work or leave their work and come from Atlanta because they were caught with a joint. And it was just mind-blowing for me to stand there and see 1, 2, 3, 4, probably a dozen of them, all of them black, of course. I didn't see a white guy or a brown guy like me, and I met them outside the court. And then this was all before I started doing justice news, but it showed me that no matter what the law is right now, if you are black or brown and you are caught with a joint in Virginia, probably you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. Would that be wrong to say?
This is the thing. It's not written into the law. It doesn't say in the law, that you have to arrest so many African American people per month, or that African American people are somehow should be surveilled, or none of that is actually written in the law. But nonetheless, it sure seems that way, doesn't it? Right? And the thing is that the enforcement, it ratchets up. I found it very interesting, the statistics on this. So the likelihood that an average person who was white and the average person who is black, their average drug use is going to be roughly the same. But yet the chance of that African American person being arrested is higher. But then as they go into court, the chance of them being prosecuted is higher than that. The statistics go up, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then the chance that they would go to jail is higher than that. So it's like each step of the way, the percentage increases. It's an even greater likelihood that they're going to get prosecuted. Even greater likelihood than that the average white person would face getting actually incarcerated. So each of these statistics jumps, and you wind up with this huge disparity where you see that kind of situation where you look out on the street and you see 100 people, and you see a rational percentage of people from different colors, but you look in the prison and you don't see anything near that. There's nothing even close to that in the prisons, even though, again, the likelihood that they would be using drugs is roughly the same. And that's why, even though there's nothing written in the law that's actually racist, nonetheless, everyone across the board is able to look at that and very easily observe that the system is essentially racist at its core. And the disparities in, there are some notable exceptions. Like at one point we were fighting a differentiation between, well, I guess there was a differentiation between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. So it wasn't really written in the law that you would arrest more African American people, but clearly the use patterns, cultural differences made it so that arresting people for white powder cocaine at a lesser charge wound up being more white people, and arresting people for crack at a greater charge wound up being more black people. So it's these things are, very much built, kind of baked in and built in the system. It's not just the police officer out on the street having a bias or something like that. It's the entire system that seems to have a bias, and the only way that we can get out of that is to completely overhaul the system, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But with drugs, I mean, it's not like we have to overhaul the system, because drugs shouldn't be illegal. I mean, the whole notion of drug prohibition is a defunct concept. The simple line of argument is this: find me one document, one research document at all, just one solid research document that shows that drug prohibition works. Because I'll give you like 8 presidential commissions, national commissions that enlisted the entire support of the entire medical community, scientific community, and legislative and citizenry of like 6 different countries. And those reports all came to the same conclusion, that we shouldn't have prohibition, that we should decriminalize, that we should legalize, that we should not follow this path. But yet with presidents like Nixon and others, we've wound up on this path anyway, and it really is a very hateful feel to it. When I'm at the United Nations and I'm hearing these countries talk about what they love about the drug war, and the work that they're doing and how evil drugs are, it really is for them a fight between good and evil, and they're on the side of good, and they've designated drugs as evil, and that's very problematic, because drugs are not living things that are trying to kill us. There's something in a baggie,
Yeah, unless Pfizer or Monsanto starts to produce them, then these leaders won't have any issue with them.
Well, I don't know. They like it as long as you're in their box. If you use those drugs outside of their box, they sure don't like it, right? Without a prescription or whatever. I mean, it's just not that they disapprove of those drugs because these drug makers make it. They give a very limited path for access to these things, and then just hammer down anybody that doesn't fit in that box, don't they?
How many black people do you have on your council?
How many black people do we have on our council? We have veterans from all across the country, so we have quite a few people.
No, the council that you talk, you said that you sit on some.
Oh no, in Virginia, the Virginia Public Health Advisory Council is, I'd say there's probably more people there on that council that are black than are in the public at large, really.
Really?
Yeah. Well, the Health and Human Services Director himself, I think, is African American. But just I'm sort of going around the room and looking at the faces in my mind. We have 3 veterans on the panel, which is interesting. One of the persons given an appointment to this council, representing the patient voice, the veteran is a veteran, a military veteran. On the council as a medical patient and representing that voice. That's interesting. So, it's actually this council. The thing about this council is it's a public health council. So there's three entities within this. There's 4, I guess I'd say 4 entities within this legalization structure. One is the legislature itself, which has a commission, a legislative committee that meets. That's made up of the legislators that wrote and will write again this legislation for legalization. And then you have the Cannabis Control Authority, which is actually made up of employees of the state that will be actually implementing and creating the regulations for legalization. How many stores are we going to have? Where are the stores going to be? How many of this kind of or that kind of things. Big decisions to make on a lot of levels, and within that Cannabis Control Authority, if they have something that they're working on that has some aspect of public health involved, like dosages, for example, like how many milligrams do you want in an average candy bar that's going to be sold on the shelf? Do you want to control that and say, you don't want to have 1,000 milligram candy bars, or you want to break it up into 10 milligram slices? I mean, there's choices to be made that have public health implications, and our Public Health Council is going to help, kind of think these things through and basically have to sign off on anything that has to do with public health. One of the interesting things I think that we're going to have to look at as a council is how much like shatter or wax or extracts will be the same amount equivalency of an ounce of flour, because it's written in the law for an ounce of flour. So you have to sort of come up with an equivalency. So it's things like that. But then there's one other thing I didn't mention yet, and that's the Equity Commission, which is a freestanding commission that will be actually handling money. Is a percentage of the tax, a pretty good percentage of the tax that's going to be collected in the stores is going to be handed over to this commission to be used for various projects around the state in building equity in the cannabis industry. So that's the structure, and our council is made up of mostly real high-level medical experts and people like that. I'm glad I'm there, and my input will be valuable, but I'm certainly no doctor. You know what I mean? I think it's good to be working with the doctors on this.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how the society survived without any doctor a couple of 100 years ago. This plant did exist, but there weren't any doctors. There were actually medicine people who worked with plants.
They observed, yeah.
So I don't know what you're talking about.
They observed, yeah. They learned from the plant itself, right? They learned from Gaia.
Yeah. My whole family is full of doctors, and I tend to stay away from them.
I hear you there, man. Yeah, but they definitely know anatomy better than I do, right?
Yeah. So going back to and even the anatomy, they know a lot of the times they get it wrong.
Oh no.
Yeah. So going back to what you're doing for the veterans, my pop was in Vietnam, and so was one of the dads of your co-founder, Rachel.
Right, and my dad.
Okay, that's fantastic. So my pop, but that's my mom's second husband.
Right.
When they were spraying Agent Orange on him for a pretty long time, I used to ask him, because before he died, I recorded some interviews that I will bring out when the time is right.
Right.
But, some of them make you cry, because, I would ask him, Pop, so what did you do when they were spraying Agent Orange on you? And he would say that, hey, I don't know what to do, so I would just take my hanky and cover my mouth.
Yeah.
And I'd ask him that, Pop, what do you mean? How are you going to protect yourself from Agent Orange by putting a hanky? And he said that, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And obviously, when he was saying all of this, he already had 3 cancers and Alzheimer's. And it took me some time to figure out and investigate, because I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the government and the military did to Pop. And, we were just thinking, how the heck can a man get 3 cancers at a time and get the 4th thing, Alzheimer's, just like that? And we dug and we found out what the hell actually happened. But my point is that when this happened to Pop, I tried everything that I could to get him some medical cannabis at that time, which was a couple of years ago. And every single doctor, including the doctors at the VA, which I didn't want to work with, but I ended up working with anyways, all of them, everyone opposed it. So why do you think that is? Is that because of the federal or state policy, or is it because of the mindset of people that they think that cannabis is this evil monster that will destroy everything?
Well, first of all, let me apologize, because I didn't realize, I might have heard you wrong. My father wasn't subjected to Agent Orange, but he was a military vet.
Okay.
So, the first thing I'll say is just an observation from my work, is that we're into a new kind of disease here with this kind of exposure stuff. When I say exposure stuff, it's not just Agent Orange. It's the Iraq War exposure situations, and even more recent with exposures in Afghanistan. So this is a new kind of disease where it's not just a disease that you get and then you go away and it gets better or whatever over time, or at least you die and that's it. But this is the kind of thing, it's a generational issue that will get worse over time. And it can actually cause issues downstream, to your children, even your grandchildren, and actually has the potential, some of these things, to get worse over generations. So that's a very different kind of thing. But as far as your question, the situation is that most doctors don't know anything about there's this cannabinoid receptor system in our body, just like our adrenaline system or immune system. We have this cannabinoid receptor system that's throughout the entire body. It evidently has a very strong role to play in modulating the activity at a systemic level of your pain management and your immune system and a lot of things in your body that have this system is essentially kind of almost running that. It's in such an important place that it helps the system find equilibrium. This is like the equilibrium building part of your system, of your overall body. And but yet this is a very new discovery. As I said before, THC was discovered in the 1960s. Well, this THC system in the body, this cannabinoid receptor system, was discovered in the 1990s. So it's relatively new. So you give them a little bit of credit for that. But like you said before, I think it even applies more here. When you have a new advance, this should be spread very quickly, but it's not. It's not being spread. So doctors that are coming out of medical school have never been taught this. And if you're a doctor and you want to learn this stuff, you can. I mean, there's continuing medical education credits that you can get, but you have to learn about it and find it on your own and then go seek this stuff out on your own. The only information that's coming through the system, inside the system, is all really bad information. That the drugs are bad, marijuana's bad. Basically just looking at it as a drug of abuse without any consideration for the fact that it is also a therapeutic, very strong therapeutic capabilities. So that's the thing. So it depends on who you're talking to in the medical community. You're talking to some doctor that's never heard of it, and all they've ever heard is marijuana's bad. They're just sure it's just a drug of abuse. It's just gonna, maybe make you think you're doing okay. They have these. I mean, if you don't know anything about it, you can imagine anything, right? So they just imagine it's some other drug and it works like some other drug. But cannabis doesn't work like other drugs. It doesn't work like drugs at all. It's not a drug, and it's an herb, and we have a relationship with this plant. We have a relationship with at a biological molecular level. We have a relationship with this plant, and it can do some really miraculous things for us on a spiritual level, on a health-based level, on a therapeutic level, on a dietary level, even house us. And that's the thing, they just don't know that. And I think there's like three different kinds of doctors there. There's the doctor that knows about this and is a champion of it because they're an evidence-based practice, and we've got lots of those doctors. I can point to hundreds of them across the United States that really champion this. And the second kind of doctor is just a doctor that doesn't know, hasn't learned yet, is honest and maybe sincere and maybe really worried about you and just doesn't know. And I don't really suspect there's that many of them anymore, because if they're honest and sincere and really care, they probably already are falling in that first camp. But then there's that third camp, or at least they should be heading to that camp. And then there's the third camp, which I really don't appreciate and I kind of worry about. We went head-to-head with them, actually, a lot in the psychiatric community. When we were working, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, which is an organization that we worked with both the VA to set up and pass the VA marijuana policy back in 2010, but also spent about 7 years, 2010 to 2017, passing state laws across the country to allow cannabis to be used for post-traumatic stress. And that effort we ran into several times in several states and several battles with the psychiatric associations and psychiatric doctors, and they were coming from a very obvious obvious perspective where they were in line with the federal government. They have their practice centered on abuse and addiction treatment, which is sort of a specialty in the medical world that allows them to prescribe certain drugs that other doctors aren't able to prescribe for addiction treatment. And they have a special relationship with the federal government for that reason. And I suspect that all that puts them in a position where they just have to really follow that federal government dogma more than other doctors do. I mean, that's just my theory, but that's what I suspect. And they really gave us a lot of trouble. And the thing about their opposition was it was always hypothetical. In other words, they never came to any of our, legislative bodies or anything where they were objecting and testifying against us or in the media. They never actually spoke about any patient experiences. They never actually talked about any real clinical practice experience. They always would talk about statistical observations based on hypothetical situations. So in other words, if you legalize it, you're going to have all these more people use it, and based on the fact that a certain amount of people may become addicted, well, you're going to have that many more people addicted, and that kind of math. And it's just really silly when you're making that kind of math in front of a whole bunch of clinicians that are standing there with their patients and their families and their communities, having recognized that this is a cannabis is actually working for them, helping them to use less pills, helping them have a better outcome, helping them have better sleep at night, helping their families and their loved ones to have better quality time with them, helping them be more productive in their community, which brings out community leaders to speak, and all that against that one doctor with their wimpy-ass federal government bullshit.
Yeah, and then later I discovered that why they were doing it, because they were pumping him up with the Revlimid and killing him with Revlimid and the chemo, because each one was billing the Medicare department. They were all billing VA and the manufacturers and charging huge amounts of money when I saw the bills come in, and I said, oh, that's what they were doing. That's why most of these doctors didn't want Pop to get a $10 plan, because he would feel comfortable and relaxed and probably heal himself and not be nauseated to death, because these guys were charging $3,000 every visit that he made for 4 years. And then, I got agitated about this because I was listening to one of your interviews on Richmond Morning News, and this anchor, I don't know which part of the world does he live in, because he said something really dumb. He was saying that, aren't you worried that we're promoting a culture of drug abuse? And I was like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, America is the world's most drugged out society where pharmaceutical companies rule. So where does that come from? Is it generational that some of the people in this country, they tell their families that, hey, this is bad, evil, stay away from that. Anyone who does that is evil too. Or this is the policy or the mandate of the government that's been just coming down the line for decades?
I think it's somewhat generational, for sure. Yeah, and it's aging out as the folks from the the kind of great generation, is that what they called it? My dad's age and as they're aging out, we're seeing less and less of this hysteria against drugs. It's been pounded into people's heads pretty well by programs that up until recently were even government-funded programs. Remember, just your brain on drugs, right? Not that long ago. And DARE classes and things, up until very recently, really still promoting a sort of an alternate reality to people on marijuana. But I think the thing about marijuana and the thing about us veterans, I think, in the work that we're doing, especially in Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, is we're very willing and quick to accept that there are negative consequences, or at least that there can be negative consequences to using cannabis, that there is such a thing as cannabis abuse, even though it's kind of rare. Of course. I've never really seen much of it in my experience, and I've seen an awful lot of people use cannabis. But to see someone actually abuse it, where it actually becomes an interference in their life, an actual problem in their life, their use of cannabis, it's imaginable and it's conceivable, and it happens, and you can point to cases of it. So I think it's important to concede that and then face that, and then from there, then you can actually make a very powerful statement about the most of us, the rest of us, the vast majority of people that are able to use cannabis. with very little to any negative consequences. And those negative consequences, many of them have been aggravated by government policies. Like if you look at the historical use of cannabis back, 100 years and more ago, they didn't smoke as much as we do now. Oddly enough, the main problem that we've always had from the government about cannabis, that you smoke it and smoking's bad, is actually something that was very much encouraged by the policy. Because when you have less of the cannabis material, you're not able to have like the hashish candies and stuff like that they enjoyed 100 years ago.
Yeah.
That we're now getting back to, and a lot more people are using cannabis as an edible or as a food,
Yeah.
or even vaporization instead of smoking. There's a lot of things that people are doing instead of smoking as we legalize it, as we get further and further towards legalization. So, the odd thing is that in so much as cannabis can be a drug of abuse, the government's policies has maximized that abuse potential and made it worse, and discouraged us from even growing it outdoors under lights, where growing it indoors under lights is so un-environmental. It's such a negative. There's such beautiful sunlight outside all across the world, and people are having to grow it in their basement under lights because they're afraid of the police.
Yeah.
And these things have very strong negative consequences for people, and it's sort of baked in and embedded into our world, and we're going to have to sort of grow out of it, I think, to a certain extent.
Yeah, because they did legalize tobacco, and I'm in Virginia. I'm so close to Richmond, which is the hub of tobacco, and everyone's just happy about it. Even Pop used to tell me that they were giving free cigarettes, and I remembered what he said about the cigarettes as I was trying to get medical marijuana for him, which I couldn't. I had to get it from Florida, and secretly get it from Florida so I can give him a couple of drops and just see him feel so good. His appetite would open up, he would smile, he would talk, his memory would come back. It was just phenomenal. But
wow.
But obviously, when you do something like that at the last stage, I don't know how much that is going to help, because I know people who have tried it in earlier stages, and in fact their cancers were gone.
Well, the treating cancer, we have a very high level oncologist, one of the probably one of the top oncologists in the country that is working on this subject matter, is actually one of our people that we've gotten to spend a lot of time with, in our activist camp, is a doctor out in San Francisco, and he actually, his advice was, we know that cannabis, and it's proven that cannabis has a lot of value, giving relief to symptomatic relief, relief of pain, relief of nausea, things like that, and appetite stimulation. These things are actually well proven. We've got a lot of science already done, bona fide, proven. Cannabis as a treatment for cancer, it's not that it hasn't been proven, it's not that it's not real, but we haven't harnessed it yet. We don't know. We have a lot of different terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles and plant material from different sources and stuff like that, in different methods of delivery, like Rick Simpson oil type thing or whatever. And a lot of this is going to have to be worked on for quite a while before we're going to be able to say, okay, use this particular plant material in this particular dose for that particular cancer, because there's a lot of different kinds of cancers, evidently.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've had is a lot of people that have used a significant dosage of extracts and actually have had a very good outcome. Most of them that I know of have not abandoned, kind of regular medicine. They've stuck with the medicine, but they've used the cannabis. And in many,
I've seen people abandon the regular medicine.
Let me finish, because in many to most cases, they baffle their doctors, and they wind up not needing to go through all those horrific treatments.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. The organic way that these doctors are learning from the patient, rather than what probably you would expect. You go to a doctor and you learn from the doctor about how you should treat your health. I mean, that's the way most people would expect it to be. So anyway, the bottom line there is that we do see a lot of, especially what I saw in a lot of video essays of patients, taking a time-lapse video of their treatment on skin cancers, and I was just absolutely blown away at how well that worked with the strong extracts being applied right to the skin, and having that. There was one that I saw that was particularly interesting out in Michigan, where the patient actually had one on each arm. There's a little spot of skin cancer. I guess they show up in various places. So the one on one arm, they treated with the doctor's, chemotherapy agent that they use for that, and the other arm they treated with the cannabis. And the cannabis got really kind of looked nasty for a minute, and then it started going away rather quickly. I'm talking like 80 days or whatever, something like that. It went away.
Isn't that cool?
And in the same period of time, the one with the chemotherapy just kept getting redder, nastier, and just, in the end it treated it, but the outcome, the one arm was just perfect, no defect, and the other arm, you could tell there was a considerable amount of work that had been done on that. So anyway, the cannabis seems to be a very graceful solution for those that will be able to use it. Right now it's a little bit crude and kind of expensive because, getting a whole bunch of that extract can be expensive for patients. And that's one of the things that we're trying to battle, and I appreciate being on this Public Health Council for, is to take on that battle at the appropriate time to make sure that patients are going to be able to have that kind of dosage available, that you're not going to have to go into a rec store and pay premium prices and plus tax, which will make it impossible for you to do that.
So what are some of the challenges that Veterans Action Council faces? And do you think that, isn't it kind of weird that the people who fought for this country without asking a question are the most screwed up at the end of the day because they've been abandoned, the veterans?
Well, the second question is too big for me to take on right now. The veterans system is one of the bigger healthcare systems in the world, and it's got a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues to deal with. Some of them are probably maybe things that you would have to deal with in any hospital, and then some of them that are particularly bad in the veteran system. So yeah, that's a whole another ball of wax. But as far as the Veterans Action Council, we've had some really interesting things that popped up over the last year that we've worked on. The last thing that jumps to mind that was fairly recent was a fellow that was in Alabama, military vet with his family on a trip using medical cannabis legally in California, not really thinking about the fact that they're in Alabama, and answered a police officer's question about marijuana by saying they had medical marijuana, showed him the card and everything, and faced considerable amount of jail time. And we actually interceded. At one moment, I thought we might have overstepped, and because we were pretty hard on the judge, and thought it might backfire and even hurt the guy. But it must have been good, because in the end, his case worked out fairly well. He got out of prison and went back home. And they just picked up his story, wound up being on PBS documentary, a recent Nova documentary. You can learn about Sean Worsley's case. So that was one case that we took up. We took up the issue of lack of hospitals in Alaska, lack of VA facilities in Alaska, and looked into that. We've given input on the national legislation that's been proposed in the United States Senate, the Booker, Schumer, Wyden discussion draft that they put in the United States Senate on cannabis. We gave a significant amount of input on the record, and we've also supplied on the record input into the United Nations process on drug control over in Vienna, Austria, which is kind of cool. So that's just off the top of my head. I mean, this is just, we've only been working at this stuff for about a year and a half, but we've got a lot more I could tick off.
So that means that, you guys are going to the UN to change world perception.
Well, yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool.
I mean, in the end, when we go to the United Nations, we're citizens that are experiencing things, that can answer questions and give input in our experience and our observations that can help member states. If you got to look at it, I'm an Air Force vet, so I always look at it from that perspective. There's an 80,000-foot perspective, and then there's a perspective on the ground. And governments have an 80,000-foot perspective, and we're working on this issue on the ground. So, we can actually give a lot of assistance to governments in seeing our perspective, which then helps them to meet the goals and needs of their own citizens. So we serve a pretty useful function inside the United Nations, and we're invited. The United Nations invites non-governmental entities to participate in meetings just for that purpose, to be able to be there to give firsthand information about that perspective from that non-governmental perspective.
What do you think is the future, if there is one, for cannabis to be taken off of the controlled substance list, and it would be not a controlled substance anymore?
You know, that's a question that I would have answered very differently years ago. It's interesting to me because when I first started as an activist, we had already been working on a rescheduling petition. When I say we, the cannabis movement, led by actually a guy named Bob Randall. He's the first medical marijuana patient that fought the government and got one of those big tins of joints. I don't know if you've ever seen one of the pictures of the big tins of joints. The government still sends out those tins of joints to just a tiny number of patients that were part of this early research program on marijuana. But he started it with a lawsuit and a fight with the federal government, this guy Bob Randall, and he went to the lawyers at NORML, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws at that time. Or no, I think it was for the repeal of marijuana laws at that time. Now it's the reform of marijuana laws. They toned it down over the years. But anyway, those guys started this petition, this lawsuit against the government in the 1970s. And I actually wound up sitting in that lawsuit in the 1990s.
Man.
So this is like this fight that's gone on forever. And I would have thought when I started out that what we would wind up at the end of the day with would be a rescheduling. You would see cannabis be treated not as a very dangerous control drug, but more like an over-the-counter medicine, something like that. That's what I probably would have imagined back then. But about 5 years ago or so, we started talking about descheduling in the movement, and that really got a lot more sort of enthusiasm and support in the movement than I ever really would have imagined. And it's a very, very strong crescendo across the entire movement. And that's really translated into every piece of legislation now says deschedule. It doesn't say reschedule, it says deschedule.
Yeah.
So with
Absolutely.
so the Booker, Wyden, Schumer draft deschedules cannabis. It completely removes it from the Controlled Substances Act. And then the more recently proposed the bill from the House would also remove cannabis completely from the Controlled Substances Act. That bill, which is led by a Congresswoman from South Carolina, is actually Congresswoman Mace, is actually written to be treat cannabis, what they call crude cannabis, as an agricultural crop, which is, I think, very interesting. So anyway, there's different proposals in Congress, and there's a lot of variations, but both of them and all of them, and none of them don't have that. All of them have deschedule. So I don't see us going back from that. I don't see us changing from that. I don't see really any sort of path that would take us away from that. So I definitely see, I don't know when it'll happen, legalization. I don't know how, we're actually going to get this done, if it'll be President Biden that signs into law or the next president or whatever, but certainly it's going to be descheduled, it's going to be removed from federal control.
So on behalf of all of those who are incarcerated for marijuana possession and are in the prisons across Virginia, what kind of ray of hope can we give them?
We're coming for you. If you're there just for marijuana, or if marijuana is predominantly the reason why you're in prison, then we're coming for you. We're coming to set you free.
You're listening to FairPlay on justicenews.net. This is FairPlay on justicenews.net.
J107.